issues. So he will be chairing this panel, and after that, we will have a roundtable discussion that will be moderated by Ms. Kate Gordon. So without further ado, and I would like to invite Dr. Prakash Abagankar to come on stage to chair and introduce the panelists.
First, I want to test, can you all hear me?
Yes. Very well.
Okay, because first I want to start with thanking all of you to listen to me now, but mostly I want to also thank the organizers of this. This is a very proud moment for me because two of my godsons are here, and one is Chandi, the other is another intern who used to work with me. He's not here, but actually works for Chandi. Vision Nation Foundation is a non-profit think tank in Washington, D.C. I am an entrepreneur, started several companies, and my wife said, look, you make a lot of money and your mind is not in making more money, but to do something good for the poor. So I moved to Washington, D.C. and we started Vision Nation Foundation. Vision Nation means Vision Peoples and Nation. And the first projects we did are to bridge India, China, and US. Those three countries I'm intimately familiar with, and I believe those are really setting the tone of economic growth and all that. So I did that in 2005. How many of you know that in 2005, Time magazine had China on their cover page? That was the first time that I used to discuss with the Washingtonian, look, we have to pay more attention to China, we have to study them. But slowly now it is a common thing. So I went to China 3 times, once with the governor of Wisconsin, the last trip was with Henry Kissinger, and I traveled even before. Great country and great friends, and a dream of mine is to really bridge these 3 countries. So today's thing, energy is a very important topic. That's why you are all here, right? Let me ask you, Dr. Smalley, who was a Rice professor, Nobel laureate, and he died at a very young age of 62. And he did a lot of work, and one of the things is he said, what are the 10 topmost challenges to the world? And here is his list. First, energy. Second, can you all guess? What is the second thing he thinks is the biggest challenge or problems to the world for the next 10 years? Any answer? Huh?
Environment.
Education?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think some of the answers are coming. His second problem was water. Because and in my presentation, when I have some time, I'll do that with you. Water security is going to be the biggest threat to energy security. Food, environment, poverty, terrorism and war, disease, education, democracy and pollution. I think you already have heard most of the presentation now. The other thing is that currently we are about 6-7 billion people on the planet. By 2050 they will grow to 9 or 10 billion. And just by that fact, it creates a lot of challenges to all of us. And on that note, I would like to introduce our first speaker, and he is going to be a great scholar, professor, and he also comes from where I come from, Washington, D.C. area. He got his PhD in Maryland. It's a great university, great place. Okay. And his bio, as you know, just like with everyone, all the details are here. But the important thing is he's working for World Watch Institute now, and he will tell us what he's doing. And prior to that, he got his degree from the University of Maryland in the Energy and Environment Sustainability. He worked for Clean Air Policy. He also is active China Program Manager at World Watch Institute. So let's welcome our first speaker and hear from him and learn from him.
Good afternoon. First, thanks the host and the organizers. It's a great pleasure to be here, to sing with all the distinguished panelists and the guests. And I think our panel's mission is to talk about the U.S.-China policy on environment and sustainable development. And it makes sense to talk about the climate change, Paris Agreement because for most of the country, the climate change policies has become a solid channel to assemble its environmental and sustainable development policies. And from this morning's panel, you get a touch on how the Paris Agreement matters. Because the number one takeaway message is that everyone should act together, and the keyword together, which means that for developing countries, especially those advanced ones and the bigger ones like China, can no longer rely on its developing status to avoid kind of responsibilities. You need to act as well. And I think before the Paris meeting, the world was interested or concerned to know what China is planning to achieve. I think China's intended nationally determined contributions to the plan certainly address those concerns to some extent, because those some of the number one target of peaking its emission by 2030 still leaves many uncertainties, like how the peak level would be and what a bend down curve look like. And those factors will ultimately determine that in the following years how many carbon dioxide that China will put into the air. And to help understand what China's NDC really means, I decided to do a rough calculation that what the absolute emission level would be by 2030 if China achieve its emission intensity goal. My calculations shows that if China's emission intensity achieved by a cut of 65%, the 2030 carbon dioxide emission level would be around 18 gigatons. And if only a 60% target is achieved, then its emission will be between 20 and 21 gigatons. And considering China now already takes up about 27% of the world total emissions, and so in the next 15 years, you would like to see that China will double that emission, and would probably take up 1/3 of the world emission. So the one thing is obvious here, in the future, China will under even more pressure from the international community. But pressure could be also a positive driver as well. I would argue that the earlier China starts meeting the challenges and actively showing cooperative actions, the more positive the international community would react. So considering the two countries, the US, China, the share of the world emissions, now they are beyond 42%, it makes a lot of sense for these two countries to act together and achieve some effectiveness. But then the question comes to what kind of cooperation? After all, the two countries already implementing various range of the cooperations, like the US-China Climate Change Working Group has developed. And after the recently concluded G20 Hangzhou Summit, the two countries also reaffirmed its partnership to advance climate actions in phasing out hydrofluorocarbons and reducing global aviation emissions. Looking beyond, I would highlight the following three areas as candidates for serious consideration. First is the data issue. Getting the numbers right. For those who don't follow the climate negotiation, climate discussion, you may think that data or calculation things that's only the minor issues and probably worth no attention. But if you talk to any climate negotiators from last decade, they would testify that the MRV issue, which stands for measurement, reporting, and verification, has always been one of the toughest topics in the negotiation table. So with its ratification of the Paris Agreement, China's climate actions in the future will be under strict scrutiny. Is China ready for that? I think my own story of tracking China's energy and emission intensity maybe give you a hint. So, as we all know, to get the right emission data from intensity goal, you need to have the base year emission, GDP, and the future GDP growth data. Unfortunately, China never officially announced or released its economy-wide emission data, nor did it acknowledge the emission data from international sources like the CDEC, which stands for Carbon Dioxide Information Analysis Center, or from EDGA, which stands for Emission Database for Global Atmospheric Research. You would think that maybe GDP data is more available and tractable, but there are also more complexities. And you guys here, all experts, you will know that there are different measurements of GDP. You have current local currency, you have constant local currency, current US dollars, constant US dollar, also GDP value things. So by definition, this different measurement of GDP will give you drastic different value, and then a different meaning of the, if you want to achieve the same emission intensity data. So I don't know why, but so far I haven't heard this kind of calculation standard question be raised up in recent climate negotiations. And what makes things worse is that even for China's official record, China's statistics system frequently alter its GDP number. Within a 5-year range, you will get like initially estimated number, initially verified number, and the final verified number. Those numbers usually differs a lot. At least statistically, the difference is statistically significant. And each decade also, China will conduct this nationwide census, which basically overthrow all previously confirmed GDP number. So with so many options and uncertainties, China's government still never tells you how their own calculations were conducted. So, for example, in its nationally determined contribution, China claimed that its CO2 emission intensity in 2013 dropped 28.56% from the 2005 level. I assembled 16 different results based on different combination of emission and GDP data from both Chinese and international sources, but none of them, match that figure or even come close. So I've been consulting with my Chinese contacts, from different authority organizations like NDRC, Energy Research Institute, Tsinghua University, and now they will give me a clarification, how to calculate those progress. In a couple of occasions, I even got, when I pushed too hard, I even got this silent but yet very polite smile, which is typical Chinese ways to saying either you got me or it's not your business. But I would argue that it's everybody's business because China now is ratification of Paris Agreement. The people would very much want to know that how far you have achieved your goal and what progress you made. So it would become more critical for China to clarify and streamline its MRV processes in order to gain the trust of the international community. So the U.S. administration also felt compelled to push forward to the MRV issues with China because that would significantly ease some of the doubts from the U.S. Congress. And the two nations' joint efforts for MRV will not only benefit China, but also create the momentum in formalizing MRV track under the UN framework. But actually working with China, with US and other stakeholders on MRV to make it a science-based, transparent, verifiable process within future international climate regime. This also fits perfectly with China's overall goal to become a responsible power in the international community. And the second area I need to highlight is the carbon market. As we all know that China has been experimenting with carbon trading in 5 municipal cities and 2 provinces. A nationwide trading system was also announced to be established by next year. And I think our panelist, Josh, will cover in detail the carbon status of those pilots and what China's national ETS would look like in the future. So I just briefly talk about the long-term effects, especially the potential role China's ETS can play internationally. I think the health carbon market could mobilize private sectors to make low carbon development a common practice because ultimately it's the business, the industries, their participation that makes the difference. It's not the policymakers, it's even researchers. The EU ETS, the country, the largest carbon market in the world, unfortunately has some rough time in recent years. And hence, they strongly expect China's ETS to provide a strong boost to the global carbon market. In fact, based on my communication with the key members from China's those pilot regions, EU has been sending multiple delegations to engage with China's ETS pilots from the very beginning, and has been actively talking to the federal policymakers, in terms of a possible linkage in the future. So building a low carbon economy is kind of race to the top game. So lacking a federal carbon market, the U.S. regional carbon markets like the RIGI or California's carbon trade system may find it potentially benefited by linking with China's ETS. And for those enterprises that in the states that are not currently under any covered by any trade system, the openness of China's ETS could also be very attractive. Of course, there will be like a tremendous challenge if US and China would like to explore such a kind of a linkage. And again, I would argue that the earlier the two nations engage in such discussion, the sooner they would be able to remove potential barriers and create more mutual benefits. The third area I need to highlight is South-South climate cooperation. The UNFCCC process, as we know, it used to be more like a North-South mechanism with the developing countries, that is dividing the share of responsibilities, and the developing countries on the recipient side of the technologies and the financial assistance. But the Paris Agreement and the relevant movement before and after that, to some extent, changed the game. Now, a selected group of developing countries volunteer to help their peers. The countries like China and Mexico even put forward a money figure to help with others. So it looks like a new era of South-South climate cooperation is on the horizon. Such a new practice and a relevant platform could benefit both China and the US. But from the US and other developed countries' perspective, they're under criticism that the existing funding they are pledged to this order is in no way is sufficient. And China's contribution could partially alleviate the burden. For China, in addition to growing pressure on cutting its emission, its previous foreign aid and investment programs were also criticized for reasons like focusing too much on resource extracting. So a shift to climate assistance could help China adjust its international image, and that's very important for China. And one possible way to further advance South-South climate cooperation is to integrate it with the existing UNFCCC framework. For instance, it could start with exploration on the compatibility and the connection between South-South climate cooperation and the North-South technological and the financial mechanism. By jointly working on key questions like does the South-South contribution count toward a country's climate commitment, and if so, how would that be counted? The US and China could help with the long-term framework setting for the South-South climate cooperations, making it more effective and efficient. And maybe in the even longer time frame, the integration of South-South climate cooperation could lead to an even more fundamental change in the international, in the architecture, operational platform, and the financial mechanism, such of the international climate regime. So there will probably be in the future, in the longer future, probably be no more distinction between South-South or North-South climate assistance in the end. Promoting a South-South climate cooperation to the extent that a more inclusive and hence more democratized international climate regime, the US-China would be able to just demonstrate the leadership in pushing forward the climate progress. So that's kind of rather very simple and dry appetizer for this session. Now you're ready for some meat from my colleagues. Thanks.
Our next panelist is going to be Peter, Assistant Research Analyst for Rhodium Group. What is interesting about his presentation, you will find he will talk about integrated approach to this energy issues. This is economics, engineering, public policy, technology, all of that, and that is how we have to look at all these issues. So, and also he has some Washington DC connection. He was at Woodrow Wilson Center. And welcome to Peter.
Afternoon. My name is Pete Marsters, and I'm a research analyst at the Rhodium Group. First off, thank you very much to our host for inviting me. I think it should be a very interesting conversation this afternoon. Rhodium Group is a macroeconomic research firm that focuses on disruptive economic trends globally. And today I hope to kind of provide some context to this panel by looking at what are the current macro trends in China and how they apply to energy demand. Help kind of set the table for some of the deeper dives that will be coming into some of the supply side issues, some of the renewable issues going on in China. So this is kind of a 30,000 foot view. To start off, this is kind of I'd like to just walk through where China has been and see how we got to the China we know today. So this is a chart of China's energy intensity. So how much energy is required to get a unit of GDP output. And I think there's three main inflection points that help tell the story of kind of how important macro trends and economic restructuring are to the energy story in China. First point is in 1958, Mao took directly from the Soviet playbook and said, we want to achieve the United Kingdom's industrial production within 15 years, and we're going to do that not through light manufacturing. We're going to do that through going right to the high value heavy industry. And so this was, the time of blast furnace in your backyard and all these kind of Soviet-style industrialization. That turns out to be a fairly inefficient way to run the economy. Having a blast furnace in your backyard is not only energy intensive, but fairly inefficient. So for the next 20 years, under this command and control, input-output-based economy, things didn't really improve a whole lot. And by the late 70s, the economy was failing to deliver growth and reforms were needed. And this is where Deng Xiaoping came in. And here, Deng set up special economics